Continuing education knows that at the end of the day, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we really listen to their needs, and we can offer them flexible options both within continuing education and across the campus.
We don't take a cookie-cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Awesome, thank you. So thank you all for joining us at the 78th Annual Conference on World Affairs. My name is Rita Valente Quinn, my pronouns are she and Ella, and I am Modus Theater's Producing Executive Director. I will be serving as today's moderator. For recording purposes, today's date is Thursday, April 16th, 2026. This panel's time is 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time, and the panel's title is People Before Papers, Embracing the Stories of Migration. Before we get started, I would like to read the University of Colorado Boulder's Land Acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation brought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Thank you. Once again, welcome to CWA and today's discussion. I will ask all attendees to remain respectful throughout the session and refrain from interruptions. Signs, banners, noisemakers, and other audible disruptions are not permitted and will result in those responsible being asked to leave the room. And please silence your cell phones. Time will be allotted for questions, and from our in-person audience, we will take your questions via handwritten note cards. So please raise your hand if you have a question, and a producer will give you a note card and a pencil. Please print legibly, then raise your hand when you have completed a card. A producer will collect it and bring it to me. And now, I would like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and I will remind the audience that full speaker bios can be found on the online at the CWA website. So we'll start with our remarks. Guillermo, would you do the honors?
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Guillermo Galindo, and I'm an artist. My art has been related to social justice, and basically I did a lot of art related to immigration in the border, and spirituality, and my art also has to do with issues of diversity and equality. And I'm trained as a composer. I'm a visual artist, a performer, and I pass the...
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessel Noor, and I work at Solutions Journalism Network. How many people here have heard of Solutions Journalism? Okay, so Solutions Journalism is the idea that the media is really good at letting us know what's wrong, but it also needs to spend some time letting us know what can be done to fix things, like what is working elsewhere, right? And another way to think about it is that the news is really good at telling us what went wrong yesterday. Solutions journalism tells us what can go right tomorrow. And so I work with newsrooms, incredible newsrooms around the country, helping them implement solutions journalism, engagement journalism with our partner Harkin. Trusting News has great resources on building trust through transparency. So that is my day job, and I'm excited to talk more about newsrooms and news outlets that are doing that work of not only informing us of what's going wrong, right? We all know what the problems are, but giving us the information we need to be informed actors in our democracy. But I'm also an immigrant, and I'm a proud immigrant. My family moved here from India when I was 3, and I really think it's that experience of growing up in a majority white area. I was one of the only people of color in my school growing up. My family's Sikh, so I had a turban and a beard. So as you can imagine, the world looked a lot different for me, and for good or bad, but I think for me, looking back, I think that just gave me a lot of empathy for other people and for the experiences that we don't always know are with people. And so that's what got me into journalism, and so it's a real honor to be here.
I love all of you so far. My name's Elena, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. I have personal and professional experience with migration and storytelling. I'm first-generation Brazilian American on my dad's side, and I'm also married to someone who is from Costa Rica and who was undocumented in the US for 16 years as a dreamer, as a child. So when we were dating and I was in college, I was like focusing on documentary, and my senior thesis, I decided it was going to be about undocumented students who were trying to get into college. It was not a personal documentary. It didn't have me or my boyfriend, who's now my husband, in it at all. But our experience of what we were going through as a couple and what he was going through against the system really informed how I told the story, and it also connected me with the people in a way that I think would not have been possible if I didn't have that personal connection. So I'm very familiar with some of the complexities of storytelling and migration. I think that it's really important to talk about both the risks and dangers involved, and also why some of those risks and dangers involved make it even more important that these stories do get told and seen, because it's almost like the more they don't get told because of the riskier that it is to tell these stories, the less we know the truth. And so I'm really passionate about finding solutions to that specific issue. I've got some feedback. Let's try again. I care very much about sound and visuals. Thank you. Bear with me. So that's, I guess, where I come to this from, and I'm here to learn. I'm here to react and like be present with you all. I think that storytelling is super healing for people, both to tell their story and also for other people to see what it's like for regular people to be brave enough to share their story, even when there are risks involved. So that's why I'm here. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hadar Harris, and I'm the twist on the panel, I think. I'm an international human rights attorney, and so I come from the paper side, not as much the artist side, right? But I've been a human rights attorney for a really long time. I come here, my most recent position was as the managing director for Washington, D.C. for PEN America, which works with artists and writers and authors around freedom of expression issues. Done a lot of work on civil and political rights, on freedom of expression. And in May, which is right around the corner, I'll be the new executive director of the Promise Institute for Human Rights at UCLA. But in thinking about this panel, and once I got done with Tradwives, I got to really start thinking about this panel, because that's my claim to fame for this CWA, I think. It was a really interesting thing to start thinking about, because in recent years, and certainly in recent months, we in the human rights community and human rights lawyers have done a lot of thinking about why we have failed so miserably in our work, with an agenda and with a framework of fundamental human rights that people generally agree with, right? It's kind of like, who's going to disagree? Well, I guess people will, but all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. If we use that as the frame for law and relationships and storytelling, we get to different places than where our policies and our laws are today. But that message, for some reason, doesn't resonate the way that we as human beings feel committed to, right? And so in recent, again, months and years, predating the election, there have been a lot of conversations about what it is to tell the story of human rights and the people whose rights are affected and directly impacted individuals, and how we talk, how we represent, how we work with and through and alongside and complement with an E, also with an I, but with an E, the work of so many advocates, and how we work together with artists and culture creators to tell those stories in a way that can actually, and journalists, to shape policy and to change laws and to bring human rights really into being fully realized for everyone. So I'm excited for this discussion and grateful to the committee for putting me on this panel. Thank you.
Beautiful. If you have questions, again, raise your hand and a note card will be brought to you. To get us rolling, to get us started, I do have some questions for the panel, so we'll start there. But please start putting your questions in the pipeline as well. So my first question for our panelists is, this panel is about people before papers. So in your work, how do you shift audiences from seeing immigration as policy, or how you strive or struggle with it, from your audiences to seeing immigration as a policy or paperwork, to seeing it instead as a human experience? We can go in any order.
I don't know if this exactly answers your question, but I did want to reflect on a massive trend, and I don't know how. I mostly talk to journalists, so I honestly don't know how much people understand or have seen this trend. And I'm talking about Americans' view of immigrants. So around, I have to be careful what I say because I don't want to get in trouble with my work. But okay, so during the last presidential campaign, right? There was a lot of talk about immigration, and the way that political media works, horse race coverage, right, really focused on making sure both sides get an equal access to the media. That really fueled, and the way that the media covers immigrants and crimes, right? We're not just victims or criminals, right? There's more to that. I think it fueled a massive shift. All that coverage of crime that was disproportionate to the reality that I'm sure many of you know, but I think that really shifted the public's understanding of immigrants and what role they serve in our communities. And I say that because just in the last few months, Pew released this study that found that Americans' view of immigrants are at the highest level ever recorded. Okay, and so unfortunately, it took the deportation of 400,000 people. It took communities getting torn apart for us to realize that. But I think that's an important lesson, right? Immigrants are not just victims or criminals, and there's a lot of well-intentioned journalists out there, and this goes beyond just journalism, but it's how we tell these stories. If we only frame, and so this is being borrowed from asset framing. If you guys haven't heard of asset framing, look up Trabian Shorters. He did a great podcast with Krista Lippett on being. I think everyone should listen to it. But it's the idea that if well-intentioned reporters only report on immigrants when they're at their worst moments, then that is the association people take away. And so I think we, as journalists, as storytellers, we have to be really conscious of the stories we tell and how we tell them. The media, social media has been weaponized, right? Because those bad actors understand this and they're way far ahead, right? So I guess my question is, how do we inoculate ourselves? And I see all of you as organizers that are gonna go back to your communities and bring these lessons and share these resources. So that's like one of the questions I want us all to take away from this, is how are we gonna help our communities build better understandings of the media we consume and have a better sense of what the world really looks like and not just what's on social media or in the news. Yeah, Trabian Shorters. Trabian. Yeah, and if you Google Trabian Shorters on Being, you'll get that podcast, and it's incredible.
I knew you would have more to say. I told you. No, I think I really appreciate everything you said, and it's something as a documentary filmmaker that we're constantly thinking about what type of images you're choosing to show at any given time. And I think that one of the reasons why I was so interested with that particular film in focusing on people who were trying to go to college was because that was so not the dominating narrative of what immigration was all about. And I really hesitate with this kind of narrative as well, because I think there's such a tendency to say, oh, let's hold up like the exceptional stories, right? Or let's say that because these kids are trying to go to college, you know, they should be treated differently, when that's not really true. It's not about what you're achieving. It's about the fact that this is your human right, just as you are. So I really, you know, I think that what you're saying is so important. And I guess just to add to that, the complete opposite end is not the answer either, right? It's like we're allowed to have immigrant stories about flawed people. Like we're allowed to have immigrant stories about things other than in Latino world. Like what is John Leguizamo always saying? You know, everybody has to play, you know, the cocaine trafficker or whatever as a Latino actor. So there's so many stereotypes that are like entrenched in these stories. And the more that we can be conscious to that and attuned to that and really lift up the ones that feel human and not stereotypical in either direction, it's like, you know, I think audiences really want to see that and people really want to make that. So it's a win-win. Let's do it. Yeah.
Since you said the word policy, I feel like I have to say something. So you know, there is a tension and a kind of competition around storytelling when you're trying to advance policy. And if you think about ICE and immigration and crackdowns and the policy initiatives that the Trump administration have been putting forward and the attempts to counter that, you can vividly see the storytelling in a variety of different ways, right? So the Trump administration, and I'm flashing to the State of the Union address, which I did watch, and the victims of violence who were guests of the president, who were pointed out, who stood up, who waved to the crowd, and whose stories were really sensationalized. I mean, horrible stories. So I don't want to undercut the fact that they were horrible stories. But those stories were used for a very particular purpose. And it was a particular purpose to sensationalize a certain element of not victimhood, but the dehumanization of the group of people that they were trying to advance policies against. So the storytelling was actually used for dehumanization purpose, not actually for the empathy for the victims, right? Maybe a little bit for the empathy of the victims. At the same time, when you think about the public outcry and backlash for some of the most blatant things that this administration has done around immigration, what are some of the examples that come to mind, right? To me, the video of Romeza Ozturk, the young woman from Tufts University who was kidnapped by ICE when she was on her way to Iftar in the middle of, at the end of Eid, a year and a half ago, right, was very visible. It was a very visceral and visible story. She was taken by ICE because she co-wrote actually, an editorial in a student newspaper about Gaza. And that was the sole purpose, that was the sole reason why they took her. She was released 6 months later. But the image of that and her story is a very compelling story. The other one that I'm sure comes to many of your minds was the 5-year-old boy, right? Liam Conejo Ramos, who was in ICE custody with his father. And the pictures of him and the story around his taking and his detention was something that really touched many people in a way that the efforts to dehumanize in the first stories that I was talking about were countered by these stories of humanization, right? That told a very different story, and one which ultimately led to Liam and his father being released, Romeza being released, and the courts doing their jobs, right? So there are different ways to still tell stories. Different people who are trying to advance different kinds of policies do it in different ways. But I think this tension between humanizing and dehumanizing is an interesting one to keep in mind. Just as the artists and the journalists, choose how you're going to shoot something, which stories you're going to tell, which perspectives you're going to have, that is also true from a policy perspective.
Yeah, I think I fit right here. My approach to the telling stories is kind of complementary but very different. I started around 2017, 16. Trump wasn't even a candidate. And I heard a program in NPR about objects that are left behind by the immigrants that cross the border. And at the time, I was teaching a class on Mesoamerican music and indigenous music. And I found out that for the indigenous people that live in the Americas before the colonization, the music was a healing device. So in order to heal, you would use your personal objects to heal a wound or to heal an illness that you had. So I decided to go to the border and start picking up items left behind by the immigrants. I started with California desert, and I went to Arizona and Texas, etc. And in the meantime, I was presenting my work in a panel like this, and photographer Richard Misrach was sitting in the audience, and he wrote me an email after, and he said, I've been taking photographs of the border for 35 years, and I would like to collaborate with you. I'm very touched with what you do. So that was the beginning of Border Cantos. That was an immense project that has been all over the country and internationally. And in that project, what I do is approach the language of music and the language of sound that is metaphorical. And I created what I call imaginary stories, in which you're making sound with a toothbrush, a pair of shoes, a bottle of water, and in which the sound that the objects produce tell the story. And I made a lot of pieces out of that work. They're in major museums. But the important thing for me, it was always to bring the situation of the people that take this journey into a familiar place to the common people, no? So you're connecting, like, we all use toothbrushes, we all drink water, and the photographs of Richard are like situational photographs. There's like crime scenes, you know, where something happened and you try to imagine the story. So our goal was to place the audience into the story instead of making it of a particular person or a particular case. And it's been incredible journey, and I keep doing it. It's very fulfilling. It's very good for me to be doing this.
What's one object that sticks with you that we need to know about?
What was your question?
What's one of the objects that you saw and photographed and worked with that sticks with you the most?
There's many, many instances. I saw one day a bunch of backpacks, and one of the backpacks was a children's backpack, and it has this Blue's Clues that is like a little doggy, and I opened it and it had a ball, and then it had a Fanta, refresco, a soda that is very Mexican, and it had like a little toy. And at that time, my son was about the same age, so it was very touching for me to see that.
We have a lot of great questions from students. Thank you, students in the room, for submitting questions. I guess I'll go in reverse order. Can you talk about your process of art making as a form of resistance, if it is a form of resistance for you all?
Well, my process definitely is a form of resistance. And what I like about what we did is that it's not didactic. It's not about Republicans or Democrats or whatever. It's about humanity, about being human, and about using art as poetry, as metaphor, that we can all understand. It's not didactic. No, it's not a. And I feel it's a very interesting form of resistance that I found probably by chance, probably was transmitted to us from somewhere else, but it's a form of resistance, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that storytelling is absolutely can be a form of resistance because the dominant narrative is trying so hard to silence these stories, you know, and the second that you refuse to be silent, it's just, I have seen it happen where people who you wouldn't expect would choose to tell their story publicly, and the power that they find and feel, and I'm never going to advocate for anyone to put themselves at risk, but the folks who decide that it's more important to them to share that story than it is to worry about the risks have this power that is so immense and beautiful. And I think there's ways to do it where you can minimize and mitigate risks as well, but like, I think that recording those histories to make sure they don't get lost is definitely going against what we're told to be doing right now.
So I'm not an artist. I'm like the least artistic person ever. But I did a story recently for my local independent newspaper about how art is being used as resistance to share information through zines and through flyers, because we know, everything online is so surveilled. We know that there's people out trying to dox you and get you fired from your job for what you post online, and you can't really trust what you read online, right? So all over the country, and my story was reported in Baltimore where I live, but there's a whole network of zine makers and art makers that are partnering with activists to hand out Know Your Rights flyers. And I actually talked to one of these artists, and he was, or one of the printers, and he was inspired by this to print like thousands of copies of these, spread them all over the city, because ICE knocked on his door looking for someone, and they were at the wrong address. But in that moment of panic, he could reach into his back pocket and pull out this little guide on what to do, right? And so I think art always has been resistance, and I think it's being used in ways that is so powerful. And even like this printed zine, which I think was popular like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, the basic, putting ink on paper is such a powerful tool when, in these times, yeah.
You want to take a stab at it? No. I have two questions that are related, so I'm going to do my best, also from students. Thank you again, students in the room. And the questions, the gist of the question is, they're interesting because they are, I feel like, about the same thing, although one has more of a global perspective and the other more of an American-centered perspective. The idea being that, from an American perspective, immigrants are woven into the fabric of our communities. But there is this discrepancy that we've talked about, right, between the reality of that interwovenness and that contribution of immigrants to our community and this other extreme narrative that attempts to dehumanize immigrants, and that the student is asking why. Why do you think there is such a discrepancy? And this is the American-centered question. The more global is why has this loss of humanity, or like this attempt of dehumanizing immigrants more globally, because this is not just an American problem, we are seeing this around the world. Why is this occurring? So I feel like the questions are related, and I give you, freedom to take it as you'd like. Yeah.
I'll take this one.
Brilliant.
I'll take it first. Like, it's good. We can tell who should answer which questions. It's very organic up here. So look, the beauty of immigrants right? And I come from, I feel like I'm a Mayflower family, right? Because 3 out of 4 of my Jewish grandparents were born in this country, which is like rather remarkable. We are not a Mayflower family by any stretch. They came from, from the shtetl, and so, but they showed up here. But what is the beauty of immigrants that have made this country, and that have the beauty of the question, really, right, resonates so deeply, and the rejection of the other that we see globally and in this country is an attempt to consolidate power and operate under the politics of fear. It is authoritarianism 101, right? Because what you do is you try to create wedges among communities that would otherwise come together to advocate and demand their rights, or support each other, or to create mutual aid, or in any of the most beautiful ways that we've seen in Minneapolis and Baltimore and in so many other communities, right? The best of how that doesn't work. But the attempt is to, again, go back to dehumanization. That wasn't in the title of our panel, but maybe it's the theme that's going to come through it, right? And it's a political tactic to consolidate power among a minority of people within any country. And you could be looking at Rwanda, you could be looking at you can be looking at the United States, you can be looking at any number of countries, right? And to consolidate power and to try to break apart other communities so that they can't unite against the minority group. So it flips minority majority, right? But it really does come back down to power, to humanization and dehumanization, and the politics of fear.
And to add to that, we talked about how immigrants are in the fabric of this country, but so are anti-immigrant political parties, right? The Know Nothing Party was one of the first political parties in the U.S., and it was anti-immigrant. So there's that history too. I think is important to recall that a lot of the stuff that we're seeing today. What in the 1930s, 2 million Mexican Americans were deported, half were citizens. So and I just found out about that recently. So there is this history of the United States that we need to acknowledge and learn about that can teach us a lot about today. But the other thing I wanted to add to the point about fear, right? Fear is so strong because that's how we evolved. When we were, when our human beings are evolving, you could not miss one warning sign of danger, right? If you missed one, that would mean that you could die, right? So our brains are hardwired. Like we can't, when you're driving past a car crash, right? You can't look away because our brains are wired. That's how we survived, to pay attention to danger signs. And so that's something that these authoritarians understand really well. And we need to also understand that and educate our communities about how this is used, because it is a tool that's been used throughout history. And we need to that needs to be part of our civic education and our civic discourse too, because this is verified, established fact. We're not it's in all the history books, right? You just got to make sure you're looking at the right ones. I mean, I don't think we have, right? Look at our social media consumption. Look at our news consumption, right? If it bleeds, it leads. That's been the operating sort of principle of news for decades and decades, because there's an understanding from the people that are and even in advertising, right? They understand what draws attention, right? And so we also have to be aware of that as well. And it's evolutionary. We can't grow beyond it. But if we understand it, then we can educate others, and also we can take steps to protect ourselves from that.
Yes, just wanted to add, the problem is not immigration. The immigration has existed since humans beings are here, the problem is fear of the other. And that's where we should be paying attention. I don't know, like, we're in Colorado. I mean, we're in Colorado. Okay. So I don't know, like, what is the idea of immigration was before there were maps and before there were geographic limits and it worked. But the immigration today comes from, I mean, we have to see the origins why people are immigrating, no? Wars, international companies taking advantage of resources and leaving people without water, leaving places polluted, and climate change, you know, that's where we have to go, no? It's like all of a sudden there's all of these people here, oh, where they come from? Like, I don't know, the way the reasoning that is behind all of this is not going to the root of the problem. That's what I want to see.
I wanted to quickly mention a book, and just to disclose, I helped work on an update of it in a very minor capacity years ago. But the book is called Harvest of Empire by Juan Gonzalez, and it's all about how the United States, through its political and economic power, influenced all the countries where immigrants are coming from today, right? Destabilized them. There's many coups, many, economic pressure, the list goes on, but we are responsible, right? We are responsible for a lot of this migration, and we're talking about climate change. We are the biggest polluter. Right now we're actively undermining efforts to address climate change. It's a lot easier to scapegoat someone who is powerless than to actually address these huge problems, right?
And I also find it really interesting when I think about how migration really is like a borderless world for like the wealthy. And it's like, if you have enough money and you want to have like your summer over here and your winter over there and like your house in wherever, and you want to do that, like no one would ever question your desire or what gave you the right, because you have the money to do it. And then like all of a sudden, when people who don't have all the money in the world want to migrate for any reason, like it doesn't have to be that you're a climate refugee. It could just be that you think it's cool over there and you want to see what it's like. Like when I think about how the entire human beings started out in this part of Africa and they migrated all over to colonize the entire world, and how that's built innate in us. And when I watch the documentaries about the elephants and their migration patterns and how they bury the elephant grandmother in the place that's like symbolic to them, and how they travel over thousands and thousands of miles on foot as a tribe to make sure that's the burial ground of their grandmother elephant. And I think about the monarch butterflies and I'm gonna get emotional, because to me, it's all the same. And to answer your question, why people can't see that, I don't know. Like, I'm so grateful that you have a really good answer to that question, because my soul says, I wish I knew,
I'm trying to decide in which direction to go. Bear with me. What does meaningful impact look like in your work? And whether that's shifting public perception or influencing policy or changing how a community is seen, even if that impact is just gaining an inch, how do you know that you've achieved it?
So that's a great question, and I think one of the most important things we can do right now is just tell these stories, right? If we only hear about how bad things are and we don't hear about what's actually happening, how people are resisting, we get the sense that there's nothing we can do. Neuroscientists call that learned helplessness, and I think that's one of the most dangerous things that can happen right now, that is happening right now. So I mentioned I work with a lot of journalists around the country, and their work really inspired me to report on, and I'm also a freelance reporter, to report on how my community is organizing, right? The work they're doing, all offline, right? And I think telling those stories, because you only can hear about it if someone knocks on your door, that's the only real entry point. But I was able to build trust with my neighbors to help tell the story. I think I've mentioned this before at another panel, but so I think it's just so important to tell those stories about how people are resisting. That's so powerful. And we have to tell those stories, right? Because the media doesn't really have the trust to do it. And so I think it's important on all of us to tell those stories and share where there is hope.
Yeah, one thing is when I started this project, I realized that my artwork wasn't about me anymore. And I really put all of my effort so that the work was about presenting the world with this issue. And I think it's been a great experience. Many times I get interviewed and all of that, and I tell them to talk more about the issue than talk about my work. I got a stage, I got a place to put my work so that everybody could see it, and it was effective, and I consider that very, very good for everybody. I like the idea of having the audience submerged into the experience as if there was their own experience, because my work is about being human, about humanity. It's not about political parties or politics. It's about understanding from a human point of view. And I find it fascinating to abandon my ego and just making it about the issue, not about me. Okay, thank you.
I have one of you. I'm looking at, yeah.
So, my initial response is don't ask me that question because we've failed at everything that we keep trying to do. But I realized that, I had sort of an epiphany a number of years ago. I was working on a project because I do a lot of work on legal reform, right? And you don't get a lot of wins when you do that work. And it's iterative and it takes a long time. And often, you hit your head against the wall and then you hit your head against the wall and you still think that you can get something to change. And so you keep going. And I was involved in a project in Armenia. I lived in Armenia for about 5 months. And it was a very interesting and successful project on women's human rights. And we were all very proud of the work that was happening. And we had written this report assessing compliance with a big human rights treaty and presented it at the UN, at the World Bank, with the government, with the NGOs. And we had a follow-up conference, and we had created a whole work plan to implement all of this change on the ground. I mean, this was really significant. We'd gotten buy-in from all the key stakeholders. We were going to really rock it and change everything. And then the funding for the project got yanked. And everybody was devastated. And I was most devastated. Well, I don't know. Many people were very devastated. And I had worked in that project with about 20 young sociologists and 20 lawyers from around the country who had not been familiar with many of the concepts that we were assessing and that we were working on, and the ways in which the work that we were doing could really lead to significant change in the country. And, I kind of packed up my bags and was heading home, and I realized that, and then I was contacted by some of the young researchers who had worked with me. And they told me that on the basis of the work that we had done together, they had chosen to now become human rights lawyers and to change the path of what they were going to do. They were integrating gender-based analysis into the other kinds of research that they were doing. And I suddenly realized that, changing laws can, like when it does happen, it can always be changed back. And we've lived that now very vividly over the last couple of years, right? And so legal reform is still really very important. I'm still very committed to doing that work. And what I realize that the most important piece of my work is actually working with young people to ensure that they understand that this is a relay race and that I'm going to hand that baton to them and they're going to have to take it and they're going to have to keep going with it. And that is probably the biggest impact and biggest contribution that I can make, because it's a never-ending struggle. All of the struggles of humanity, right? Not to make it too big, but it's big. And so we all have a part to play in it. So when I think about my impact and why I'm super excited to go back to a law school and to be working with students, but also on these same big issues that I've been working on, it's that idea of the relay race. And so the impact sometimes can be quantified and sometimes really can't be. But then you get the text message from a former student who is rocking it and hitting it out of the ballpark, and you're like, okay, now I know why I did that, right? So.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was just remembering one of the unexpected outcomes that happened when I made that film, which featured 4 different people who were between the ages of 15 and 17 or something. And it was 4 families that kind of lived in the same region, but they didn't meet each other or know each other until the day that the film premiered. And then they were all in the same room, and they all got to meet each other after they had just watched their own experience reflected in the other 3, right? Not in the exact same story, but in the sense that they were so isolated in their reality, and just the act of making the film ended up bringing them together, which was this outcome that I had never anticipated or even thought about, which maybe was my hubris or my youth or whatever. I don't know. And this has happened to me time and time again. I produced a film about gun violence and the history of the NRA on our political system. And then when I realized at the premiere, I'm looking out and it's all of these families who have this thing in common, all of these activists who maybe have met each other before or who are working towards this goal. And now they have yet another tool. Now they have yet another reason to connect and bond and have a shared experience. And more often than not, it led to them reigniting each other's fires and being able to continue the work. So when I say that I'm not someone who considers myself an activist, because I don't know that I don't know that I'm facing the same consequences as folks who I really consider activists for what they're doing. I get paid to do my work, and I'm very happy with what I do and all that. So that's the reason I make that distinction. But I do feel like I'm playing a role in something bigger than myself when something like that is happening, and it's something that doesn't have anything to do with the financial economic success of the product, but everything to do with the journey of the people that were involved. So for me, when that happens, chef's kiss, I'm done, I'm out, I'm done, that's good, I can rest well. It's yeah.
I just wanted to mention a moment. We had the show in Pace Gallery in New York, and Richard and I came really early to the gallery, very early in the morning, and we opened the door. And in one front of one of our pieces, we saw 2 women, one with a mop and one with a broom in front, and talking about the piece. And it was just shh. We just sneak in and just stand there, and it was one of the most marvelous moments.
It's very clear that this work is very personal and important for all of you. One of the students asked, how do you stay grounded in the middle of all of it?
It's about people. You don't do this work unless you actually kind of love people, right? And that you care for people, because all of the work is grounded in their stories and in our stories. And so it's part of what makes you crazy about the work, because you kind of can't stop, because you have this deep commitment to the people who are impacted and affected by really bad policies, right? But at the same time, you have to also kind of honor collective humanity and find ways to do that in a lot of different ways. So I think it's about the people. That's how you stay grounded. It isn't the way that you stay not burnt out. That's a different question. And that's a complicated question that every person has to kind of find for themselves, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess I wonder, grounded and what that means and in what context, because to me, staying grounded makes me think about how do you keep your perspective beyond maybe just the immediate goal in front of you. And for me, that's always my family. That's my 2-year-old. That's going outside and feeling the sun on my face. Like, the things that are, the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening, and anything I do today is not going to change that. Like, those types of things keep me feeling like I'm still, a fleshy human in this earth, and there's a limit to what I'm capable of today, and that's all right,
So I'll read the question verbatim. As an organizer in my own community, we often find ourselves feeling defeated with so much loss in the political discourse. How do you all keep yourselves grounded and ready for the next day? That's the question verbatim.
So I guess from a solutions journalism perspective, you can, so the way you would cover this in solutions journalism is that, okay, you got defeated here, but where is there a community that made some progress, that moved the needle, right? And what can your community learn from that? And that is like the basic essence of solutions journalism, that it's not enough to know part of the story. This is the whole story. The whole story is not just what's the bad things, the defeats, but also where there's progress. Because the problems we're all facing, these are collective problems, right? We're all experiencing them differently, but there's things that we can learn from other communities, there's things we can learn from in our own communities, and there's a lot we can learn from history too.
I think also this is pretty basic and comes back to being a fleshy human, but really truly moving your body and getting grounded in your body when it feels like too much. I cannot overstate exercise being going for a run will clear my head 4 hours of anything can't, you know what I mean? And it takes 10 minutes, and I don't know what it is about sweating and upping my heart rate that completely changes the perspective. So I don't know, maybe that's something it feels pretty essential when I'm doing anything heavy that time has to be carved out.
And get offline, right? Go out, talk to your neighbors, do all the things that keep us human.
I just bake really complicated things. I don't know, because I've heard that thing about exercising. I don't know. And I've heard that thing about getting offline. I don't know. But I just bake really complicated things. Really complicated, yeah.
I love that we have a plan. Jaisal, you mentioned history just a moment ago, and someone asked, a student asked, what role should history play in promoting human stories? And I don't mean to put you on the hot spot, Jaisal. It's just something for all of us to think about.
Could you repeat that?
Sure. What role should history play, and this person is asking it in the context of US history, what role should history play in promoting human stories?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say the the way history is taught in schools is so boring because it's not taught through human stories. There's so many great books and films about the people behind the change, right? The way it's taught in school, it's like during the civil rights movement, Harriet Tubman woke up one day, decided to go sit on the bus, right? That's not what happened, right? That was the result of decades of organizing and hard work. And there's so many instances of people overcoming incredible odds, right? The abolition movement, how women got the right to vote, civil rights. The history is just full of these inspiring stories where people were probably in greater danger than we are now, and found ways to overcome them. Obviously, like, history doesn't repeat itself entirely, and we're in a whole new moment that history can't really prepare us for in some ways, but there are those human stories, stories that don't get told enough, and I think that's one of the things that gives me hope, too, is just going back and, as a journalist, looking at the works of people like Ida B. Wells, who documented lynchings all across the South, had to flee from town to town to get her work printed. Like, there's just so much amazing stories there that tell the stories of how we're all human and how we're connected.
Can I take it a step further, though? Is like, we know that history has only told certain stories, right? And there are big gaps in the stories that history tells and doesn't tell. And really, fortunately, over the last X number of years, I don't want to put a number to it, but it's recent, right? We've become much more, we meaning like broad discussions, because particular communities have always told those stories, right? But there has been a broader awareness and reckoning that many of those stories of history, it's not just partial history of, the organizing that went into these different movements, but it is actually really different histories of what went on for different groups of people, right? That are essential to understanding how we move forward, right? And also what actually happened in the past. So that's why one of the things that is so incredibly frightening about this moment in the United States is the attempt by the president and his administration to erase history and to erase that recent reckoning and storytelling, which is very different. I will just give you one. Everyone's nodding your head, but I hesitate because I know this is being recorded and I don't necessarily want to tell the story of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, right? Which I just went to because I really loved watching the Artemis mission, and I live in Washington, D.C., so last Saturday I was like, I could go to Trader Joe's or I could go to the Air and Space Museum, and I'm going to go to the Air and Space Museum. And so I texted my kids and I was like, yeah, I'm not coming home right now. And I went to the Air and Space Museum, and they've just spent 7 years redoing the whole museum, and they've just reopened it. And my kids grew up there, right? So we know that museum very well. And they have changed the stories in that museum to talk about discrimination against Black astronauts and female astronauts, and who only very recently were able to join the active astronaut corps, Artemis mission notwithstanding, right? And the struggles of female aviators and Black aviators, and it is incredible because it is a piece of history that did not exist in that museum until they reopened it now. And so I just give you that very tangible example. History is all of the histories, robust history, wide history, accurate history, broad history, and history that maybe conflicts with itself is incredibly important in order to understand how we move forward.
Go read the stuff they're trying to ban. That's a good place to start.
Absolutely. That should be the top of your reading list.
I also think about how telling stories informs history, right? Because if you can create these primary sources, if there are, that's what gets compiled to make history. I didn't understand this until I was taking some history classes in college, so maybe if there's students here, you know what I'm talking about, where I was like, realizing, oh, these history books are composed when someone looked at a million primary sources and decided to make sense of it and tell a story about it. So sometimes I think you can, like when I view myself as documentary, sometimes I think about I'm creating this time capsule also of this time that maybe in the future someone can refer to say like, oh, the history actually was like this, or these people who wouldn't otherwise have their story told, we're investing like a lot of things in order to make that thing and make that story preserved. And that makes it really exciting and cool. And I think there's so many ways to record now that it's truly like if you find yourself living through one of these things, at the very least journaling about it, documenting it, finding it within yourself to express it in some way, like does become a historical artifact in an extent. And that's something that we could all be contributing to, even if no one ever saw it, but you actually don't ever know,
We have 8 minutes, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to ask that can be covered in 8 minutes. I'll go with it anyway. So we have 8 minutes, and knowing that, work on issues of immigration is very sensitive because we're working with communities that are already vulnerable to aggressive policies, aggressive rhetoric. How do you navigate the responsibility of telling these stories ethically and authentically, and while protecting the folks that you're telling the story about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was actually interviewing people and they were actually going on camera with their name, their face, and their story. And they were really going public with the fact that these were undocumented people. It was 2013, so things were a bit different, but still, it was very new. And a lot of people had not told their story previously. And because they were minors, that was even more complicated. So for me, the most important thing was that everybody really understood what we were doing, and then the decision was not mine to make. Like, I would never want to tell somebody whether they should not or whether they should. My job was to present the opportunity of what I was trying to do and explain, like, this really means that this could be public. We don't know where it's going to be screened. It could be screened internationally. It could be downloaded on the internet. I wanted to make sure that everybody really understood what they were signing up for, that their parents knew, that their family knew. I went in person and met with folks. I had people translating. It was a decision that was made over time. There were several months. There was an entire summer between me first contacting people and us actually filming, so there was like plenty of time to back out. There was time in the editing process. And ultimately, these people wanted to tell their story, and they were proud to tell their story, and they understood the risks, and at the same time, they still wanted to do it. And I didn't feel that it was my decision to decide that those risks were too steep for someone to participate either. Like, I think that that's not my role. So the most you can do is just really outline it, not hold anything back, outline the worst case scenarios, and yet also the best case scenarios, and then let those people decide in a way that feels super good for everyone.
Jaisal, do you have a journalist perspective?
I mean, I would agree. Like, make sure you understand the risks and make sure the people involved are making informed decisions and realistic decisions. Like, yeah, you can't make those decisions for them, but you can help them be informed about the risks, and so they can make their own informed choice.
Even though I'm not a journalist, I've worked journalist adjacent for a long time, right? And we were talking about the other night with students, right? There's a code of ethics for journalists that is promulgated by the Society Society of Professional Journalists, right? As opposed to the protection of different organization. And it's a code of ethics that is like widely adopted by journalists, and it sort of is around how you do your journalism in an ethical way. And there have been big discussions over the last number of years around how you report, particularly on issues of immigration, and particularly with undocumented communities, and a lot of discussion around, in newsrooms, around especially photojournalism and taking photographs at protests. So generally, First Amendment and journalistic ethics says that if you are in, a public protest in a public place, you have put yourself there, and any photographs of you are fair game. It can be published in the newspaper, and nobody can have a dispute around that. But what was found, especially right after the George Floyd murders and the advocacy that was done and the activism around that, and then obviously in the Gaza war and all and encampments and things like that, were that people's faces were being identified, and whether that was through facial recognition software or it was through other methods. Photographs of people's faces were putting them in danger, and that created a new issue or a different issue, a timely issue for journalists to really think about. And I worked a lot with student journalists. I was the executive director of the Student Press Law Center. We had a lot of conversations with student journalists about how you actually tell the story of a protest on campus without putting the community in danger that you're reporting around. And that was specific around a DACA protest a number of years ago. And what they learned from journalists in Hong Kong was that instead of photographing a protest from the front, you photograph the protest from behind. And you can still get the sense of what the protest is, but you don't show the faces. But there was a lot of discussion and a lot of debate with veteran journalists who said, no, if they're at the protest, they're at the protest, and it's fair game. So the SPJ Code of Ethics is now in the midst of a reassessment right now. They're actually looking at it and getting feedback from a lot of people to think about, like, what's fit for purpose at this moment when technology has changed, when crackdowns have changed, and how this works. So it's an interesting question that is actually playing out in real time in a whole variety of different ways.
Mine in particular is I think we found a clever way to do something in between treating the issue and immigration without showing anybody's face, any person. And it's an exercise probably related more to forensic anthropology and having the viewer or the listener be the protagonist. You are the immigrant, and not having anybody else in particular involved. That's it.
And that brings us to the end of this panel. Thank you to our panelists and the important work you do. And thank you all for sticking around to the last panel of the day. Thank you.